Olivia looked me dead in the eye in our parents' living room in Westport and told me I had no place in her wedding while my parents stayed silent as if erasing me was normal. So that night Madison Hale 29, booked the first flight to the Maldives, and 10 days later, as I sat above turquoise water, the news came that her perfect wedding had collapsed in front of the whole town. I was standing in my parents' living room in Westport, Connecticut, when Olivia looked at me with that practiced smile of hers and said I had no place in her wedding. The words were so sharp and casual that for a second I thought I had misheard. She was in her element, sitting on the couch with a bridal magazine spread open, her engagement ring flashing under the light, while our parents hovered nearby like props in her show. Dad leaned back in his chair, his reading glasses still perched on his nose, even though he wasn't reading, and Mom fiddled with a vase of lilies she had brought home from her flower shop. Neither of them said anything. They didn't flinch. They didn't defend me. They simply let the words hang in the air, as if Olivia had announced the weather. I opened my mouth, closed it again, and finally asked why. My voice shook and sounded younger than I wanted it to. Olivia smoothed her hair, tilting her head the way she did when she wanted to emphasize how calm she was compared to everyone else. She said it was simple. The wedding was going to be intimate, curated, perfect. She said she didn't want drama, and she didn't want me there. I laughed a brittle sound and asked if I was really drama to her. She looked at me with pity, the same look she used when we were teenagers, and she got away with everything. She said I had always been difficult, and that this was her day, not mine. I looked to my father, who finally lowered his glasses, but he only sighed as if this entire conversation was a distraction. Mom kept arranging the flowers, her lips pressed tight, avoiding my eyes. My chest tightened. I remembered the years when Olivia wanted ballet classes and got them while I begged for art supplies and was told to be practical. I remembered being 16 and working at the diner down the road while she borrowed Dad's credit card for new dresses. I had thought we were past that. I thought adulthood had balanced us, but here we were again, and I was being erased. I asked her if she understood what she was doing, that she was drawing a line between us that might never be mended. She shrugged and said some things were better left clean, as if my presence were dirt on her white dress. Dad finally muttered that I should let it go, that it was Olivia's decision, and that I should respect it. Mom finally turned from her vase and said in that soft voice that was supposed to be kind, but felt like salt on a wound, that I had always been independent, that I didn't need the family the way Olivia did. The humiliation rose hot in my face. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Every memory of being the extra, the afterthought, the one who filled in the gaps but never got the applause, flooded me at once. Olivia was still smiling, flipping her magazine, already moving on, as if I had been dismissed from the room. Something in me broke, or maybe it clicked into place. I excused myself, walked upstairs to the bedroom I hadn't slept in for years, and shut the door. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I searched flights out of New York, scrolling past options until I saw Maldives. The pictures of turquoise water and villas on stilts looked like a different planet, a place where no one knew me as the lesser daughter. I didn't think, I just booked. Departure tomorrow evening. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the confirmation email. I felt hollow and furious all at once. Downstairs I could hear Olivia's voice, light and cheerful, talking about seating charts. Mom laughed at something she said, and Dad coughed the sound of approval. Not one of them had followed me up to check if I was all right. Not one of them had cared. I started packing right then. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet, still faintly smelling of college dorms, and began folding clothes mechanically. Jeans, sundresses, swimsuits I hadn't worn in years. My laptop went in last because work was still a tether I wasn't ready to cut, though I told myself I wouldn't open it. I wanted to leave not just the house, but the entire world they had forced me into. When I wheeled the suitcase back downstairs, they were still gathered around Olivia's bridal plans. Mom looked up briefly and asked if I was staying for dinner. I said no. Olivia didn't even glance at me. Dad only muttered something about locking the door behind me. I walked out into the cool Connecticut evening, the suitcase bumping behind me, my chest heavy, but my steps steady. I didn't know if I was running away or finally walking toward myself. All I knew was that tomorrow I would be on a plane, and for 10 days at least, I would be unreachable. That night in my Boston apartment, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow of the city outside my window. The anger had dulled into something sharper, a clarity I hadn't felt before. They had told me in 100 ways over the years that I was not chosen, not the favorite. Tonight, they had finally said it out loud, and I, for once, was choosing myself. The suitcase waited by the door, and my ticket sat ready in my inbox. For the first time in a long time, I felt certain of something. I would leave in the morning, and whatever they did, whatever storm was brewing around that wedding, it would no longer be my burden. The next morning I dragged my suitcase into the back of a cab before the sun had even risen. The streets of Boston were damp with last night's rain and nearly empty, and the quiet felt like a blessing. At Logan, I moved through the lines in a daze, showing my passport, scanning my boarding pass, clutching a paper cup of coffee I barely tasted. The weight of what had happened with my family pressed down on me, but every step toward the gate felt lighter. The flight was long hours folded into hours as I crossed oceans. I dozed against the window, my neck stiff, my body tired, but when I opened my eyes and saw the faint stretch of blue water below, something in my chest loosened. As the plane descended, the ocean opened up like a painting, endless turquoise stretching toward the horizon, the dots of atolls shining like emeralds. The island air rushed into the cabin as soon as the doors opened, heavy with salt and heat. I followed the line of travelers down the jet bridge, blinking in the brightness. At Malé Airport, I cleared customs, and the resort staff met me with a sign that had my name. They smiled and took my luggage, leading me toward a sleek speedboat. The engine roared to life, and the boat skimmed across the water, throwing up sprays of white foam. I leaned against the rail, the wind tangling my hair, and for the first time in days, I let myself breathe. When the boat slowed, the villas appeared, wooden structures standing on stilts above the shallow sea. Each one seemed to hover above the water, private and still, with stairs leading down into the ocean itself. My villa was at the far end, isolated, surrounded by clear water that shimmered in the sun. The staff carried my bags inside and left me alone with the silence. Inside, the villa was more beautiful than I expected. White walls, soft wooden floors, wide windows that opened to nothing but water and sky. A bed draped in linen faced the sea, and a small plunge pool sparkled on the deck outside. I stepped onto the balcony, gripping the railing, staring at the horizon. The same body that had sat in my parents' living room, absorbing humiliation, was now here, looking out at something too vast for bitterness. I set down my phone on the nightstand, determined not to look at it, but curiosity gnawed at me. Messages from home had already started piling up, but I ignored them and opened my email instead. At the top was one I had noticed the night before, from Claire Morgan, CEO of Brightwave Media. Subject line: potential opportunity. I clicked it open, read the first sentence, then stopped. She wanted to talk about a position, something about strategy, something big. I closed it. I told myself this trip was not about work, not about chasing approval or achievements. I needed distance from everything, even the things that might be good. I whispered under my breath that I did not want to think about work, not now. I closed the laptop and pushed it away like it was dangerous. I changed into a swimsuit and walked down the wooden steps straight into the ocean. The water was warm and soft, wrapping around me as I floated on my back. The sunlight glared above me, and the sting of salt filled my nose. I spread my arms wide, letting the sea carry me, and told myself again that this was mine. Olivia could have her perfect seating charts, and my parents could have their careful silence, but here I had something they could not touch. By evening, I was exhausted from travel and salt and sun. I ordered dinner to my room, grilled fish with lime, and ate it on the deck with my feet dangling over the water. The stars came out one by one until the whole sky was scattered with them. I remembered how Olivia used to point at constellations during summer nights, and how Dad would always praise her curiosity. I had pointed too, but no one listened. The bitterness rose, but then the waves slapped gently against the stilts of the villa, reminding me to let it go. I showered the scent of coconut soap clinging to my skin and slipped into bed. The sheets were cool and crisp, the ocean air moving through the open windows. For the first time in days, I did not hear my sister's voice in my head. I did not see the way Mom had looked at me as if independence were a curse. I only heard the water steady and endless. When I woke again, light poured across the room. I made coffee in the small machine and took the cup outside. The ocean was so clear, I could see schools of fish darting beneath the surface. I thought of the storm that was surely building back in Connecticut, of fittings and rehearsals, and my parents bustling to make Olivia's day perfect. The distance was a balm. 10 days felt like an eternity. I sat on the deck sipping my coffee, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had chosen myself. Whatever chaos was waiting back home, whatever storm would come, it could not reach me here. I stretched out on this deck chair with the mug warm in my hands, the air thick with salt and sunlight, and without warning my mind slipped backward to all the times I had been told who I was supposed to be. I saw Olivia at 10 years old, holding up a drawing she had scribbled in crayon, our parents clapping like she had just painted the Sistine Chapel. I remembered standing beside her with a sketch I had worked on for hours, only for Dad to say it was nice, but maybe too much imagination, that I should focus on something practical. Dad always said Olivia was the good one, the easy one, the daughter who listened. He used the word obedient as if it were a crown. When she threw tantrums as a teenager, he called them growing pains. When I argued back with reason, he called me difficult. He liked that she let him make decisions for her, while I was always questioning. Mom had her own way of reminding me of my place. She ran her flower shop with gentle hands, always arranging petals into something beautiful, but with me she arranged words to keep me quiet. Whenever Olivia wanted something, Mom would smile at me and say that I was strong enough to let her have it. Be kind, be patient, let your sister shine. She said it so often it carved itself into my skin. I remembered a Saturday morning when I was 15. Olivia had asked Dad to drive her to the mall for a new dress for a school dance. I had asked to go too because I needed supplies for an art project. Dad turned to me and said he didn't have time for both. Olivia got her dress. I stayed home using scraps of paper, piecing together something that never looked right. That night Olivia twirled in her new outfit, and everyone said how lovely she looked. No one asked about my project. Tom was younger, only 27 now, still in grad school, but even when he was a kid he saw it. He would sit with me sometimes after dinner when Dad was praising Olivia for her grades that I knew she had pulled together last minute. Tom would whisper that it wasn't fair. But then he would add that it wasn't worth fighting over, that I should let it go, that keeping the peace was better. He said it with kind eyes, but it only made me feel more alone. The memories stacked on top of each other, each one a small dismissal. Olivia getting the front seat, Olivia being excused from chores because she had dance practice. Olivia's mistakes brushed aside while mine were recorded like evidence. They told me I was independent, as if it were a compliment, but it was their excuse not to care for me the way they cared for her. I set the mug down, my fingers tight around the handle, and felt the truth settle heavy in my chest. I had been the extra, the spare. The one they assumed would take care of herself while they poured everything into Olivia. I wasn't just left out of her wedding. I had been left out for years. The water lapped gently at the stilts beneath me, the sound steady and calm. And I realized that maybe this was the first time I had actually admitted it to myself. I wasn't waiting for them to see me anymore. I wasn't hoping for their applause. I was already the outsider, and maybe that was where I belonged. The sun shifted higher, glinting off the waves, and I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. My chest hurt, but it was a clean hurt, the kind that comes with truth finally spoken, even if only inside my own head. For the first time, I understood that I had been living as the ghost of their family, and now I had the chance to stop haunting the halls of their approval. The breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers from the island gardens, and I told myself quietly that I was done being the spare. I was done being the one who gave way. I would sit here in this place I had chosen for myself and let the truth settle. I had always been the outsider, and now I could finally breathe as one. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves hitting the stilts beneath the villa and the distant thrum of a boat engine. I made coffee and sat outside with my phone telling myself I would only check the weather. Instead, I ended up scrolling through social media. That was when I saw a post from a girl I had gone to high school with. She had tagged the Grand Harbor Hotel in Stamford, a five-star place that overlooked the water, and written about how beautiful the venue was for Olivia's upcoming wedding. The picture was of a ballroom glittering with chandeliers, tables covered in white linens, and staff bustling to set everything just right. I stared at it for a long time, trying to imagine my family in that space. I could see Mom fussing with flower arrangements, Dad pacing with his stern face, as if he were running the whole event, and Olivia walking in like she owned the place. Everyone back home would be talking about it, all the cousins and neighbors, comparing the Hale family's grand display. I had been erased from the guest list, but my absence would not stop the show. Later that afternoon, another notification popped up. Someone had commented under the post, asking if Benjamin Ross was really as successful as people said. The reply was vague, just a rumor that his real estate projects had stalled and that debts were piling up. The thread filled with speculation, but no one had proof. It was the kind of small-town gossip that could fade away in a day or explode into something bigger. I set the phone down, pressing my palm against the table until I felt the wood bite into my skin. A part of me wanted to dig deeper, to ask questions, to find out if my sister's fiancé was truly as solid as everyone claimed. But another part of me was tired, too tired to care about what storm might be brewing in Connecticut. I had bought myself 10 days away, and I refused to let gossip follow me across the ocean. Still, the whispers echoed in my head as I walked down the steps into the shallow water. Fish darted around my ankles, flashes of silver in the clear sea. I floated on my back, staring up at the sky, and repeated to myself that their world was no longer mine. Whether Benjamin was drowning in debt or not, it did not matter to me. I would not rescue them, even if I could. When I returned to the villa, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Tom. I hesitated before opening it. He rarely reached out on his own. The message was short. He wrote that he hoped I was doing all right, and then added that maybe it was better I was not around. He said not everything was as perfect as it looked. I read it twice, the words sinking into me with a mix of relief and dread. Tom never exaggerated, never stirred trouble. If he was warning me, it meant something real was happening beneath the polished surface of Olivia's wedding plans. I wanted to reply to ask what he meant, but I stopped myself. He had reached out quietly, and if I pushed too hard, he might retreat. Instead, I typed back that I was fine, that the island was beautiful, and that I would see him when I got home. I left it at that, though my hand lingered on the phone long after I pressed send. As the sun sank low, painting the water in shades of orange and gold, I sat on the deck and let the rumors drift around in my head. The hotel ballroom, the perfect decorations, Benjamin's supposed debts, Tom's careful warning. All of it felt distant, like a play being performed in a theater I no longer visited. I wrapped myself in the sound of the waves, the warm air against my skin, and told myself once more that I would not let their chaos spill into the space I had carved out for myself here. The horizon darkened, the first stars pricked through, and I carried that thought with me into the night, knowing the storm in Connecticut was gathering, whether I cared or not. By the fifth morning, I had begun to lose track of time. The days blended into one another with the rhythm of the tide, the sound of water brushing against the villa, the scent of salt thick in the air. I woke early, pulled on a swimsuit, and joined a small group headed out on a boat toward the reef. The sun was already sharp against my shoulders, and the water was a sheet of blue glass stretching in every direction. When I slipped beneath the surface, the world changed. Coral stretched in strange shapes, fish darted past in flashes of color, and the muffled silence wrapped around me like a cocoon. I floated there suspended, watching a sea turtle move lazily through the current, and for a moment I forgot that anything else existed. No wedding, no arguments, no hierarchy of worth. Only the endless water, and my body moving through it. Back on the boat, dripping and exhilarated, I laughed with strangers who asked where I was from. I told them Boston, and one of them said I looked freer here than in any city. I did not answer, but inside, I felt something shift. That evening I sat on the deck of the villa as the sun dropped into the sea, turning everything around me orange and then pink. I ordered fresh mango juice, sipped it slowly, and watched the horizon blur. The stillness gave me courage, or maybe it was the distance. My laptop sat inside on the desk, the unread email from Claire Morgan still at the top of my inbox. I had avoided it since arriving, but now my fingers itched to open it. I finally gave in. The glow of the screen lit the dim room as I clicked into the message. Claire had written that she had followed some of the campaigns I had worked on in Boston and thought my strategic thinking could be valuable at Brightwave Media. She mentioned a senior communications manager position in New York with a salary that made me blink and read it again. She asked if I would be open to a virtual interview when I returned from my trip. I sat back, the fan humming overhead, my pulse quickening. My parents had spent years telling me that my choices were small, that my independence meant I would scrape by, but never thrive. Olivia had thrown those words back at me whenever she wanted to remind me of my place. And yet, here was an opportunity written out clearly, from someone who did not know the Hale family, someone who had seen only my work. I closed my eyes and let the thought settle. I imagined walking into a sleek office in New York, shaking hands, being judged not by my family name, but by the value I brought. The idea made my chest expand in a way I had never felt back home. I reread the email once more, letting every line imprint itself on me. I whispered to myself that maybe I was not the failure they wanted me to believe. Maybe I had been carrying proof of my worth all along, and now someone else had finally noticed. When I walked back outside, the last strip of sun had disappeared, leaving only a glow on the horizon. The air was warm against my skin, the waves still restless under the villa. I leaned on the railing, breathing deep, and felt something unclench inside me. For the first time, I began to believe that my value could exist apart from Olivia's spotlight, apart from Mom's dismissals, apart from Dad's sighs. That night, I slept with the curtains open, the moonlight spilling across the bed. I dreamed of coral and light, and a door opening to a place where I was no longer the afterthought. In the morning, I would write Claire back. For now, it was enough to know that someone out there had seen me, and that recognition glowed brighter than any chandelier in a Connecticut ballroom. The morning of Olivia's wedding, I woke to the sound of gulls circling above the lagoon. I stretched, poured myself a glass of water, and felt the calm settle over me like a blanket. I had no idea what was happening back in Connecticut. My phone was face down on the nightstand, but by late afternoon, curiosity tugged at me. I picked it up, and the screen lit with notifications stacked one after another. At first I thought it was just more chatter from group texts, but then I saw the videos. The first clip had been recorded by someone at the reception. Olivia was standing near the head table, her white gown glittering, her voice carrying across the ballroom. She was laughing, bragging about how everything had come together perfectly. She told a circle of guests that her family had spared no expense, that Benjamin's investments were stronger than ever. The camera zoomed in slightly, and I could see her gesturing grandly, basking in the attention. Then the frame shifted. A man's voice cut through, sharp, asking about a missing set of financial documents. The music faltered as the band stopped mid-song. Guests looked at each other. Olivia froze for a second before smiling again, pretending she hadn't heard. But the voice pressed on. Another man stepped into view, papers in hand, and then I realized it was a lawyer. The video jumped shaky as the person recording tried to catch everything. Benjamin appeared, his face pale, sweat shining on his forehead. He argued, voice raised, saying it was a misunderstanding. The lawyer read from the papers, citing debts, forged signatures, unpaid contractors. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Suddenly, 2 uniformed officers walked into the ballroom. Gasps echoed as they approached the couple. Guests pulled out their phones, filming from every angle. Olivia clutched Benjamin's arm, her smile gone, whispering frantically, but Benjamin pulled away. The lawyer, Nancy Rivera, introduced herself, clearly stating she had been retained by one of Benjamin's former partners. She laid out allegations of falsified financial statements. The officers nodded, one of them asking Benjamin to step aside to answer questions. I pressed pause. My breath shallow, then hit play again. The recording shook as people pushed closer. Benjamin's voice cracked, declaring he would not stand there and be humiliated. He shouted that the wedding was over. His tie was loose, his face flushed, and then he turned and stormed toward the doors. Olivia chased after him, the hem of her gown dragging across the floor, her veil slipping sideways. Guests shouted, some trying to calm her, others shouting accusations. The camera caught the moment the doors slammed. Olivia collapsed against the wall, makeup streaking while security tried to calm the chaos. Someone yelled that the marriage contract had not even been signed yet. Another person cursed about wasted money. The clip ended abruptly, but my phone buzzed again with another upload. In the second video, Olivia's voice cracked as she pleaded for Benjamin to come back. He refused. He said he was done, that he would not tie himself to her or her family with police standing in the hall. The camera panned across guests, whispering, laughing nervously, pulling out their phones to post online. My stomach twisted. I knew Westport gossip could spread fast, but this was more than whispers in a diner. This was spectacle. This was humiliation broadcast across feeds and stories. Already I could see the reposts multiplying captions full of disbelief and mockery. I set the phone down, staring out at the water, trying to process it. This was the wedding I had been told was too perfect for me to attend. This was the day they erased me to preserve Olivia's image. And now it was collapsing in front of the entire town. I picked the phone back up, and another notification blinked. A local news outlet had already written a piece citing unconfirmed allegations of financial misconduct and sharing stills from the video. The article described the wedding as chaotic guests, leaving early police cars parked outside the Grand Harbor Hotel. I scrolled through the comments until the words blurred. Some people defended Olivia, calling it unfair to blame her. Others sneered, writing that the family had always been arrogant. My family's name, the Hale name that Dad guarded like a shield, was trending in a way I never imagined. I closed the browser and sat in silence. The waves slapped gently beneath me, the sky above impossibly clear, so far from the storm tearing through a ballroom in Connecticut. I should have felt vindicated, and in some ways I did, but there was also a strange heaviness. Even in their downfall, they would find a way to tie me to it. I could already hear Mom saying that if I had been there, maybe things would have been different. I exhaled slowly, watching the horizon blur in the fading light. The storm had reached its peak back home, and all I could do was watch it through a screen thousands of miles away. At the same time, the ballroom was unraveling. Another video surfaced. This one had been taken from the far side of the reception hall after Benjamin stormed out. The guests were buzzing, voices sharp and rising, and Olivia stood frozen near the door, her gown askew, mascara streaking down her face. In the middle of the chaos, my grandmother Eleanor slowly pushed herself up from her chair. She was 80 years old and frail in frame, but the room shifted when she stood. She tapped her cane once on the polished floor, and the noise fell just enough for her voice to cut through. I could hear it clearly, even through the shaky recording on my phone. She said the Hale family had brought shame upon itself, not because of Benjamin or the police or the gossiping crowd, but because of the way they had treated their own blood. She said every guest there knew how Olivia had been favored, how the rest of us had been dismissed, and that now the truth had shown itself in the ugliest possible way. The camera zoomed slightly and caught my father sitting stiff in his chair, his face gray. My mother's hands fluttered in her lap, her mouth working silently, as though searching for words. Olivia shook her head, crying, but Grandma kept speaking. She raised her chin, her voice firm, and declared that next week she would meet with her attorney to amend her will. She said Olivia would not inherit the estate that had been promised to her. She said she was done watching injustice repeat itself. The crowd gasped. Some whispered loudly. Others leaned closer to hear every word. Cousins shifted uncomfortably. Uncles and aunts glanced at each other, but no one interrupted. For the first time in years, someone had put into words what I had lived through quietly. Grandma said she would rather see her savings turned into a scholarship fund in my name than watch it all poured into the hands of someone who had built her life on favoritism and deceit. The video panned across the family table. My father looked as if someone had struck him. My mother blinked rapidly, tears forming, but she did not speak. Olivia's mouth fell open, and she cried out that it was unfair that she was the one who needed support. Her voice cracked high and desperate, but Grandma only shook her head. She said fairness had been missing for decades, and now she was correcting it while she still had time. I replayed that part more than once, listening to the steadiness in her tone. She was not cruel. She was not shouting. She was simply stating what everyone had been too afraid to say. The video ended with Grandma sitting back down, slowly leaning on her cane, while the guests erupted in murmurs. The storm of the ruined wedding had been joined by a revelation no one could ignore. I set my phone on the table beside me and stared out at the Indian Ocean, my chest tight with a mix of pride and sorrow. Grandma had always been quiet at gatherings, watching more than she spoke, but she had seen me. She had seen all along. It took a public disaster for her to raise her voice, yet hearing her defend me, claim me even from thousands of miles away, was like air rushing into lungs that had been starved. The waves slapped gently beneath the villa. My hands trembled as I picked the phone up again. More messages were rolling in. Distant cousins, friends from town, even Tom had texted saying Grandma had just dropped a bombshell. He wrote that the room went silent when she announced the will change. He wrote that for once, Mom and Dad had no answer. I leaned back in the chair, letting the humid night air cling to my skin, and thought of the legacy my grandmother was willing to rewrite. I thought of Olivia in her ruined dress screaming about fairness. And I thought of myself alone on an island, suddenly less invisible than I had ever been. The stars were bright overhead, scattered across the black sky, and for the first time in years, I felt like someone in my family had chosen me. On the 10th morning, I woke to my phone buzzing across the nightstand like a restless insect. I let it vibrate until it stopped, then rolled over and pulled the sheet higher. When it started again, I finally reached for it. Dozens of missed calls filled the screen. My mother, my father, Olivia, even numbers I did not recognize. The unread messages stacked so high I could only scroll. The first one said everything had fallen apart. Another begged me to come home. One from my mother read simply, "Please answer, we need you." I sat on the edge of the bed with the ocean spread outside my window, the turquoise water sparkling as if nothing had happened. My hands trembled as I opened the news app. The headline glared back in bold letters. Society wedding collapses as groom walks out, police investigate financial fraud. Beneath it was a still image of Olivia in her gown, tears streaking her face, one hand reaching after Benjamin as he pushed through the doors. The caption read, "Chaos at the Grand Harbor Hotel." I tapped play on the embedded video. The ballroom I had seen only in pictures was in shambles. Guests were shouting, chairs, overturned phones flashing like a storm of light. Olivia screamed at someone off camera. The anchor's voice explained that allegations of fraud had been presented publicly, that the groom had ended the ceremony, that the bride's grandmother had announced she would alter her will. My grandmother's words were quoted in full, her name printed for the world to see. I set the phone down on the table of the deck, the humid air sticking to my skin, and pressed my palms against my eyes. For years I had dreamed of someone finally holding my parents, and Olivia accountable, dreamed of justice, dreamed of karma. And now here it was arriving without me lifting a finger. My body shook with something close to laughter, but edged with grief. It felt like revenge and loss mixed together. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Tom, shorter this time. He wrote that Mom and Dad were frantic, that Olivia was inconsolable, that everyone kept asking where I was. He added quietly that he thought it was best I stayed away. I typed back, "Thank you," and left it at that. The breeze lifted strands of my hair as I leaned back in the chair on the balcony. From here, the ocean looked infinite, clean and untouched. I compared it to the small-town ballroom thousands of miles away, crowded with gossip, humiliation, and betrayal. I knew people back home were already replaying the videos, sending them to each other, whispering about the Hale family's disgrace. My family's name had been dragged into headlines, and my absence had become another part of the story. I scrolled once more. The news had spread to national outlets. Reporters quoted guests who described the night as unbelievable. Others mocked the extravagance, pointing out how quickly perfection had crumbled. Olivia's face was everywhere. Dad's reputation was mentioned, his career as a lawyer connected to the scandal through guilt by association. A part of me hurt to see it. Despite everything, these were my parents, my sister. But another part of me burned with the sharp satisfaction of knowing they could not escape the truth anymore. The world had seen what I had lived with all my life. The phone kept buzzing in bursts, the notifications endless. I held it for a moment, staring at the screen lighting up in my hand, then pressed the side button until it went black. The silence returned instantly, the waves filling in the space where voices had been. I carried the phone inside, set it face down on the nightstand, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection stared back at me in the glass door, tired but steady. I stepped outside again, sat down, and pulled my legs up to my chest. I whispered to myself that I was not their scapegoat anymore. Whatever storm raged in Connecticut was theirs alone. I lifted my face to the sun, let the heat settle over me, and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the horizon was a line of fire, where the sky met the sea. I knew the messages would keep coming, but I would not answer. I decided right then to stay an extra day to give myself the gift of quiet. For once, I would let the storm pass without me. When the plane touched down at Logan, the gray clouds hanging over Boston felt heavier than the island air I had just left. I wheeled my suitcase through the terminal, the sounds of rushing travelers pulling me back into the rhythm of home. 10 days of silence had ended, and now the noise returned sharp and insistent. In my apartment, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeted me. I unpacked slowly, folding swimsuits that still smelled faintly of salt, sliding sandals back into the closet, placing the phone charger by the bed. The emails waiting for me had stacked up. Among them was one from Claire Morgan's assistant, confirming a virtual interview for the following afternoon. I prepared the way I always did, making lists, reviewing old campaign decks I had built, rehearsing answers in front of the bathroom mirror. But this time, something inside me was different. I no longer felt the need to prove myself to my family. I wanted to prove something to myself. The next day I logged in early, adjusting the camera so the light from the window fell clean across my face. Claire appeared on the screen, her voice steady and direct. She asked about my background, my years at the agency in Boston, the social campaigns I had led. I spoke clearly, outlining metrics describing how I had turned small budgets into projects that actually worked. She leaned forward, slightly nodding as I spoke. When I finished describing a campaign for a local nonprofit, she smiled and said she remembered seeing it. She added that she had also heard my name from a colleague she trusted, someone I had worked with years ago who still remembered me. That was why she reached out. The words landed like a lifeline. It was not luck. It was not an accident. Someone had seen my work, valued it, and spoken my name in a room I was not in. I sat taller, the tension in my shoulders loosening. The interview lasted nearly an hour. We spoke about Brightwave Media's expansion, their push into digital storytelling, their need for leadership that could manage both creativity and strategy. She asked how I handled pressure, and I told her about managing a campaign while my team was cut in half. She asked about vision, and I told her I wanted to build stories that mattered, not just noise that filled a feed. At the end, she said she was impressed by my clarity and resilience. She said she could tell I had been tested. I did not explain how, not yet. I only thanked her, and when the call ended, I sat in the silence of my apartment, the hum of the radiator the only sound. My phone buzzed again with family messages, but I let them stack unread. I opened a fresh document on my laptop and began outlining ideas, sketching the way I would approach their upcoming product launch. My mind was sharp, alive, turning possibilities into structure. When the evening came, I cooked pasta, poured myself a glass of red wine, and sat by the window overlooking the street. People hurried by with umbrellas against the drizzle, cars splashed through puddles, and I felt anchored in a way I had not before. Claire Morgan had given me an opening, and someone from my past had held the door wider by speaking my name. I let that thought settle. I had not been erased after all. My work had been building a record behind me, and finally it was catching up. I closed my laptop, set the glass aside, and leaned back in the chair. The storm back home was still raging, but in this quiet Boston evening, I felt the faint shape of a future forming in front of me. I drove back to Westport a week later, the highway lined with bare trees and patches of dirty snow that hadn't yet melted. My stomach tightened as the town signs appeared, the familiar streets pulling me back into years I had tried to leave behind. The house looked the same as it always had, white siding and shutters that needed paint, but stepping onto the porch felt different. The air was heavy, the silence inside heavier. Mom opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She pulled me into the kitchen without a word, the smell of coffee stale in the air. Dad was already there, sitting at the table with his hands clasped. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his jaw set in stone. He didn't waste time. He said the family was drowning in humiliation, that the press had been relentless since the wedding, and that Olivia's name was being dragged through every paper in Connecticut. He said I had contacts now, that people respected my work, that I could help them. He wanted me to call someone, anyone, to smooth the story over. I stared at him, the same man who once told me my career was a hobby, not a future. My voice was calm when I asked why it should be me. He snapped that I was his daughter, and that families stood together when under attack. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling. She said Olivia was breaking down, that she cried every night, that people whispered when she walked down the street. She said she didn't know how to fix it, but maybe I did. I sat back in the chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I told them softly that I would not be making calls. I said Olivia's choices were hers, that Benjamin's choices were his, and that I had no responsibility to clean up what they created. The room froze. Dad's face hardened, his fists tightening. He asked if I really wanted to see my sister destroyed. I answered that I had been destroyed plenty of times under this roof, and nobody had lifted a hand for me. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then his voice rose sharp, calling me selfish. The word cut through the kitchen, echoing off the walls. Years ago, it would have sent me upstairs in tears, hiding under blankets. But now it landed with no power. I looked at him steadily and said, maybe being selfish was the only way I had survived. The front door opened and Tom walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped when he saw the tension, his eyes flicking between us. He asked quietly if everything was all right. I told him it was fine, that we were just talking. He knew better, but he didn't push. Later that night, I sat with him on the back porch, the cold air biting at our faces. He asked if I was really okay. I nodded, and for once it was true. He said he wished things were different, that he had seen everything, but had never known how to speak up. I told him his message during the wedding had meant more than he realized. Before I left, Grandma Eleanor came into the living room where I was putting on my coat. She touched my arm and whispered that she was proud of me. She said next week she had an appointment with her lawyer. Her eyes held steady as she promised she would do what she said she would. I stepped outside into the cold night, the driveway slick with frost, my breath hanging in the air. Behind me, the house stood unchanged, but inside everything had shifted. Dad's anger, Mom's pleas, Olivia's silence, Tom's quiet loyalty, Grandma's strength. They were all pieces of the same broken puzzle. I got into my car, turned the key, and sat for a moment before pulling out. For the first time, I felt no pull to look back at the windows glowing behind me. The road stretched ahead, and I followed it back toward Boston, with a calm I had never known. I got back to my apartment and settled into a week that felt strangely quiet. The news kept rolling in from Connecticut. Articles mentioned that police were requesting financial records from Benjamin's companies, and that a grand jury might be convened if the paperwork showed a pattern. A reporter called my phone twice and left voicemails asking for comment. I deleted them without listening to the end. I was not part of that story anymore. Midweek, an unfamiliar number flashed on my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. Olivia's voice spilled out raw and hoarse. She said she was in Boston and needed to see me. She said it was urgent. I told her to pick a public place. We agreed on a cafe near the public garden because it was neutral ground and quiet during the afternoon. She was already at a corner table when I walked in. The Olivia I knew always carried herself like a spotlight followed her. The woman in front of me looked smaller. She wore a sweater that hung off one shoulder, and her eyes were ringed with sleepless nights. She started speaking before I sat down, words tumbling over each other. She said the investigators were asking questions she could not answer. She said she never signed anything and never looked at the ledgers and never thought to ask. She said if I could tell them that she had no knowledge, if I could say she had been kept in the dark, it would help them move on from her. I let her talk until the rush of her voice slowed. I asked her why she thought my word would carry that weight. She said everyone knew I was the practical one, the honest one, the sister who never lied. She said if I vouched for her, the stain might not stick. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her palm was cold and shaking. She whispered that she would pay back every dollar that had been taken if someone would give her a chance to fix it. She said, "Just this once, help me only this once." The cafe clatter grew louder in my ears. I watched steam rise from the espresso machine and tried to steady my breathing. Years of being the fallback made my reflex to rescue twitch. But another part of me stood up inside and refused. I told her I was not going to lie. I said I would not offer statements about things I did not and could not know. I said if she had not asked questions before, that was her choice, and that choices collect their own debts. She stiffened, hurt flickering across her face, and then anger. She said I wanted to see her ruined. She said I was jealous of everything she had been given. The words bounced off me like pebbles against glass. I told her I was done buying absolution with the truth. I told her to get a lawyer and tell that lawyer everything. I told her that was the only path left. Her voice dropped to a hush. She said she had a lawyer, but no one like the woman who had stood up at the wedding and made a scene. She meant Nancy Rivera. She said Nancy seemed to be everywhere now. She asked if I had spoken to her. I said I had not. The door opened, and a gust of cold air swept through the room. As if called up by the mention of her name, I saw Nancy step inside with a detective I recognized from a photo in the paper. They did not look dramatic. They looked like people doing work in a city on a weekday. Nancy spotted us and walked over. The detective waited by the door and took out a notebook. Nancy greeted us politely. She said she would not take much of our time. She said Olivia should expect a formal request for records and an interview. She turned to me and said something that sounded like a line she had spoken before, but felt tailored to me. She said people sometimes try to fix things with words. She said words under oath have weight. She said lying to investigators or to a court is a crime called perjury, and that it does not care about family loyalty. She added that if anyone pressured me to make a statement that was not true, I should tell my own counsel immediately. Olivia drew in a sharp breath and stared at me as if Nancy had accused her by name. Nancy did not look at her. She thanked us for our time and stepped back to the door. The detective nodded, then the two of them left as quietly as they had come. Olivia slumped in her chair. She whispered that everything was slipping through her fingers. She said if I did not help, the worst would happen. I told her the worst had already happened, and that she needed to tell the truth and face what came next. She wiped at her eyes in small, angry movements, then stood and said she had to go. She walked out without looking back. I stayed in the cafe long after she left, letting the buzz of conversation wash around me. My pulse was steady. There was grief, yes, because this was my sister. But there was also relief. I had not folded. I had not agreed to carry a story that was not mine. The next day, Tom called to tell me Grandma had scheduled the meeting with her attorney. He asked if I could come down. His voice held something like hope. I took the morning train to Westport and walked the few blocks to the small brick building off Main Street where the law office sat above an insurance agency. The waiting room smelled of paper and dust and old carpet cleaner. Grandma sat in a straight-back chair, wearing a pale blue coat and the string of pearls she saved for serious occasions. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her eyes were bright. The attorney ushered us into a conference room and closed the door. There was a stack of documents laid out neatly, and a notary at the end of the table. My parents were not there. Olivia was not there. Tom sat beside me and kept his hands clasped. The attorney walked Grandma through the pages. He spoke clearly and slowly, confirming that she understood. She nodded after each section. The plan was simple and firm. The estate would be converted into a charitable trust called the Eleanor Whitman Fund, with an initial funding of $2 million. The fund would provide scholarships and grants for girls in Fairfield County interested in arts and communications. The trustee would be me. The distribution instructions were precise. Annual reports would be filed. Oversight would be built in. The estate would not pass through Olivia's hands. Grandma signed where the sticky flags told her to sign. The notary witnessed. The attorney added his signature. The sound of pen on paper was soft but final. Grandma exhaled and reached for my hand. She told me she had wasted too many years silent. She said she wanted to leave the world in a way that corrected what had been wrong inside our family. She said I would do this well, and that the girls we helped would grow up believing their voices mattered. I do not know when the tears started. They were quiet and did not embarrass me. Tom squeezed my shoulder. He whispered that he had never seen Grandma look so certain. The attorney slid a folder toward me, containing the trustee guidelines, contact information for the accountants, and a simple timeline for the first filings. Responsibility settled on me like a coat that fit. We left the office and stepped into the thin winter sun. Grandma tucked her arm through mine and said she would like a cup of tea before she went home. We walked to a nearby diner that had been there since before I was born. She ordered tea and a slice of lemon pie. I had coffee and watched her savor each bite. She told me stories I had not heard about her first job in a dress shop in the city, about the time she saved for months to buy a second-hand coat, about the way she learned to trust her instincts when no one else did. When we stood to leave, she pressed the receipt into my hand and told me not to forget to tip well. Outside, the air felt clean. She hugged me carefully and let Tom take her home. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the folder under my arm and the weight of everything that had just changed. On the train back to Boston, I stared out the window at stretches of water and marsh and old mills. My phone buzzed with another call from an unknown number. I let it go and opened the folder again, running my finger over the name of the fund. The pages were thin and official, but what they meant felt large and human. This was a future built on something other than apology. This was a choice to use what had been hoarded as a way to make space for girls no one had chosen before. The train rocked, and the sun slid lower over the tracks. I closed the folder and rested my forehead against the glass, a steady calm returning as the city drew closer.